Trump will be appearing today at sentencing. There was some conversation about whether Trump should show up or not, whether a refusal to appear would serve his interests or not. And his attorneys and him, I'm sure, had a conversation about that and have concluded that would probably be taking the bait a little bit too much. And so they're showing up. In other words, if he doesn't appear, then that's going to cause a warrant to be issued, and they'll say he's flouting the law and blah, blah, blah. So they'll turn it into a whole thing. So he's now, according to CNN 35 minutes ago, he's going to appear virtually today. So he'll be zooming on in there. And they write, he's going to appear virtually, according to people familiar with the plans, scheduled 9:30 Eastern time, about 29 minutes from now. On Thursday, the Supreme Court came out and allowed the sentencing to go forward. And we made a bad boo prediction on that one. I thought this would go the other way. It was very close, 5-4. And the squishy usual suspects called John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett were the individuals responsible for allowing this to go forward. And let me share with you what they published in the Supreme Court. And it's a joke. And I was skeptical that they would emasculate themselves so incredibly, but they've done that here, as you can see. We've got the report from the Supreme Court, the order, and we read through this yesterday. The application for a stay presented to Justice Sotomayor by Trump is denied for the following reasons. Okay, this better be good. They say, first, the alleged evidentiary violations at the state court trial can be addressed in the ordinary course on appeal, which is a joke because the evidentiary violations are stemming from immunity. And immunity, according to the Coinbase case and according to the Trump case, in their own court, they said that immune allegations pause the proceedings and then allow the appeals to flesh themselves out. So this is basically saying, forget everything we said in that prior Trump case when we talked about immunity. So they forget it. So they just, everything we said, it doesn't really matter. Okay. It's like your mom says, don't go do that. Then you go do that. Your mom's whatever. Then you realize it doesn't have any weight to it. Embarrassing. Second, the burden that sentencing will impose on the president-elect's responsibilities is relatively insubstantial in light of the trial court's stated intent to impose a sentence of unconditional discharge after a brief virtual hearing. It's like Alvin Bragg wrote this. It's not that big of a deal because it's only an hour and we're not going to impose any penalties. Also ridiculous. We know that it will bundle up this case. He'll be a felon. I've got questions. Can he vote? Is he going to vote in the midterms? Can he vote in the midterms? Can he travel to Canada because he's a felon now? It'll be convicted felon. So this is also idiotic from the court. They're totally dismissing the consequence of a felony. It's a brief virtual hearing. He's the president-elect of the country. Brief virtual hearing. Now, this also begs the question, what happens on appeal? What happens if Trump appeals this and the Supreme Court, or let's say the New York State Court of Appeals or the highest court in New York, they come back down and they say, we should remand this for a new trial, actually. So let's have a new trial. There was a little bit of a mistake, so our solution is a whole second trial. And then it goes back down to Merchan. He says, great, I'd love to do that. Let's do that after Trump's presidential term is over. And then we'll just have a new trial when he's done because, of course, Trump appealed it. And we now have a second bite at this. And then more evidence comes out at the second trial. And then Merchan comes back and he says, based on this new evidence, there's no way I can commit to sentencing you. Now, fast forward 4 years. Under the unconditional discharge terms, now I've learned a lot more. Now you're going to prison. So that opens up some exposure as well. And we want all of that to be hanging over the president's head and the useless Supreme Court, 5 of them, not including Judge Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh, who's all said, yeah, we would have granted this and we would have put a stay on the sentencing. But the 3 Democrat judges, joined by Judge Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett, are all responsible for this happening today. And this is what we get from them? It's not that big of a deal because it's like, whatever. It's like a slap on the wrist. Okay. And I can understand them not wanting to get into the new presidential elect immunity concept, but this portion of this whole thing vitiates their prior opinions, and it's embarrassing. And it's just them kicking the can down the road. Now, a second thought on this is that they know where this is going. Okay, we can be furious about this, but also maybe think that they're thinking 2 or 3 steps down the road. For instance, if this comes back up to the Supreme Court on appeal, okay, so let's say Trump, the case is now finalized, there's some conclusion to it. Trump is sentenced and convicted now. He is a convicted felon now after the sentencing. I would even agree to that. Of course, if that is the case and he appeals it to New York's highest court, they say no. Then he goes to the Supreme Court again on the final appeal. The Supreme Court could come back out and then dismiss the case. Okay, so maybe that's what they're saying. This is just a hint. It's, hey, it's a breadcrumb. So just appeal it normally. Just take your sentencing today. Just eat it for a minute and then come back on appeal. Once you get back to us in the ordinary course of appeal, then maybe we'll have Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett come back out and correct the record on this. Now, that might be wishful thinking, but what's happening now is Trump is about to be sentenced. And so let's see what the cables say about this. He is now capturing the attention on the cables.
Conditional discharge. That is less than the
You know, John, as I was thinking about this case this morning, I was thinking about how we've seen so many situations over the last number of years where people are willing to trample what's right and fair in order to get Donald Trump. I certainly saw this when I was at the Department of Justice. Donald Trump would fight crime. Suddenly an investigation would be opened because maybe he was doing it to help himself. Donald Trump wanted to fight on behalf of the elderly victims in the nursing homes during the COVID pandemic. Oh, that might be political interference to help himself win the election as well. Donald Trump didn't think that people associated with him, Republicans, should get harsher sentences than similarly situated people. That must be favorable treatment, investigation open there. And this happened again and again. And I really hope in this next term that there is some restraint exercise and people drop this obsession of Donald Trump and focus instead on what is fair and good. And if Donald Trump is advocating for those things, that's a good thing.
I expected all of that.
All right, so we're going to keep our eye on what's happening there on the cables, but I also want to share what's happening from the people who are there reporting. So this gentleman, Tyler McBrien, is there, and you can see he's standing there right outside the courthouse. Says, good morning from 100 Center Street. I'll be covering sentencing for Lawfare, and Anna Bauer is going to be handling it too. You can see here's a photograph right outside. A couple more replies from him. He says, man, it's a little chilly out in Chinatown, 26 degrees this morning. At 9:30, Trump's coming in, going to be sentenced for 34 felony convictions. As we know, Trump will be making the appearance via Zoom. Now, this has come up a couple times. Question about audio recording. It says, judge has allowed audio recordings for the first time for the duration of the trial, right? Because this is his big moment. Judge Merchan is really a person without, I think, any purpose or meaning in his life. He just is obsessed with Trump and stopping him. So this will be his big finality, fireworks climax for the judge, let's say. Yeah. And so he's going to record it on audio. Now, I don't believe it's going to be live streamed, so I don't think that we're going to hear it in real time, but they apparently are going to release it later. So we'll keep our eye out for that. Now, he's waiting in the courtroom this morning. It's been a breeze. President-elect is not here. He got his ticket. He's going in, and there's more. So he's there. Now, Adam Klasfeld is also over there. He said, good morning from New York. He's going to be covering it live. We already talked about the Supreme Court and what they've done. A lot of stuff has been filed there. And we've also got Inner City Press is on the way. So he's over there about to be live tweeting. And so if we don't have a live feed of the audio, which I do not expect, then we'll just keep our eye on what the cables are reporting, and we'll keep our eyes on what the folks on X are reporting. And you can see here's just another general search, Trump, and you can see a lot of stuff being published here. So stuff coming in, and it's happening basically any minute now. So we'll keep our eye on it. We'll see what C-SPAN has for us. A couple updates from them, CNN rather. They say his lawyers view the lack of a penalty as a significant victory, which is obviously true. They say it's less than a penalty for a speeding ticket, okay? It's zero consequences at all, other than the label of felon. Even though Trump and his legal team fought to block the sentencing on Friday, they believe it's a significant victory. He's going to get an unconditional discharge, which means less than the penalty for a speeding ticket. Trump is, of course, unhappy about this. It symbolizes now a felony conviction, and that anger has driven their appeals. But Trump's lawyers see this as just checking a box so they can appeal a conviction, which is true, right? They're stuck at the moment. Now, the Supreme Court still should have never allowed this to happen. I think that they'll hopefully correct the record down the line, but his lawyers believe it's a victory. He faced 4 criminal cases, 2 cases related to the J6 case and the Florida classified documents case dumped because Jack Smith is not a real boy. Trump's lawyers expect Friday's hearing to last about 45 minutes. It should be very quick, especially since there's no penalty. Not going to be a penalty at all. In addition, and he's going to be on Zoom. In addition to comments from the judge and prosecutors, Trump lawyer Todd Blanche will speak during the virtual appearance. Emil Bove will also be in the courtroom. So I don't think Trump is going to say anything. It's not clear if Trump, who is appearing virtually, will speak according to the source, but I doubt it. And so they're waiting for this to happen. Let's check in on what the president is saying and what he's up to today. He said late last night, he spoke the following. He said, "I appreciate the time and effort the United States Supreme Court in trying to remedy the great injustice done to me by the highly conflicted acting justice who should not have been allowed to try this case. Every legal scholar stated unequivocally that this is a case that should never have been brought. There was no case against me. In other words, I am innocent of all the judges' made up fake charges. This was nothing other than weaponization of our justice system against a political opponent. It's called lawfare, and nothing like this has ever happened in the United States of America, and it should never be allowed to happen again. To this day, this highly political and corrupt Judge Merchan, has put a gag order on me, which takes away my First Amendment right to speak about very important aspects of the case. For the sake and the sanctity of the presidency, I will be appealing this case and am confident that justice will prevail. The pathetic, dying remnants of the witch hunts against me will not distract us as we unite and make America great again." From the president late last night after the order dropped from the Supreme Court that basically emasculated themselves. So he, of course, is going to appeal it. You got to show up and be sentenced in order to appeal it. There's no appealing the Supreme Court's decision to anybody else. And so that is done. Now, this is what it looks like inside the building. And the president will not be turning the corner like usual. So we're not going to be waiting for him to barrel in here. But maybe his attorneys will be here at some point. So we're going to keep our eye on this. We'll keep our eye on the cables as well. This woman's looking for the front door. All right, so they're coming in. We already read through that. Now here was Trump's response to the Supreme Court. So as we're waiting for the Supreme Court to get underway, here was the final reply from the president yesterday. And they rejected this, but here was his argument. He said, look, nothing in their opposition justifies denying Trump's application. Why? Alvin claims this court lacks jurisdiction. That's obviously ridiculous. The court didn't even address that. The court clearly has jurisdiction because they took the case and made a decision about it. Now, to the contrary, this court has authority under the All Writs Act. It's got inherent authority. It's got its own rules. On the equities, Alvin Bragg downplayed the importance of the presidential transition and the need for an energetic executive, which we do need. It is, however, indisputable that both are concerns of great national importance and their constitutional nature trumps any state-related concerns. Federal government has the supremacy clause. They put it in there for a reason. Bragg also misreads this court's precedents to argue that it need not reach the question of whether Trump is entitled to an interlocutory review of his immunity claims. And the court, again, skipped right over that. Didn't even address it. Just said, you can appeal after it's over. What? Similarly, Alvin Bragg's analysis of Trump's claim that as president-elect, he's immune from criminal process completely disregards how this court has said those claims must be evaluated. In other words, you don't just have Merchan at the end of a trial just say, that looked like it was unofficial to me, and call it. Finally, Alvin Bragg does nothing to undermine Trump's argument that official acts evidence was improperly used to secure his conviction. And again, the Supreme Court didn't even address it. Thus, Trump's application should be granted and a stay should issue. But they said it's just like a short hearing, and they are making him go through it. Now, here's what Trump said. Alvin Bragg made mistakes. He made errors. The relief cannot be issued, it was his argument, because the court lacks jurisdiction. Ridiculous. They say no. That argument assumes this court can only issue a stay under U.S. code, but that's not true. The power to issue a stay is well preserved in the All Writs Act. And because this court has potential appellate jurisdiction over these other federal questions, there's also another basis from this case. Now, indeed, this court's rule expressly contemplates the issuance of stays. Your own rules say you can do this by allowing them in the most extraordinary circumstances. Obviously, this qualifies. Issuing relief here is consistent with other cases where stays have issued despite other pending proceedings. Now, there is no need for a final decision in New York or an exhaustion of remedies through their highest court. This is sufficient here. And indeed, that should suffice under the rules. Trump's appeal involves immunity. This is a right that's separable from and collateral to the merits of the case. It's a whole separate issue. It's a question of whether you can even be prosecuted in the first place. And if you deny his stay request, coupled with this sentencing that's happening now today, it's going to make relief impossible. And so in sum, this court should grant a stay. Of course, they did not. They say Alvin Bragg is here whining about equities, saying this is very fair to let us sentence Trump. It leads by pointing to New York's policy of sentencing, they say, without unreasonable delay. And we don't want the feds to come in and interfere, which I can understand. No one likes the feds. But those do not trump the constitutional prohibition against state judges and prosecutors interfering with the president's duties. We also don't like political hack prosecutors that are trying to kneecap the country. Bragg's use of official acts evidence would eviscerate a president's immunity for his official acts. And the Supreme Court didn't even address this. Just said, well, whatever. Just let it happen. The lack of interlocutory review, which means in the middle of the case, we take it up. That action, if we don't do that, denigrates the Constitution's requirement that the president has immunity. And likewise for Trump. Same for him as president-elect. The net result is a strike at the founder's goal of creating a vigorous and energetic executive to ensure we've got good government. And furthermore, sentencing a president during his transition creates a constitutionally intolerable risk of disruption to national security and America. And if anything, it is to be taken from Mercan's decision to let Trump appear virtually, right? These guys are they're like begging. We are going to get him a pillow for his head. So he just shows up for sentencing. They're like, there are no burdens at all. We'll give him a massage. There's no burden. We just want that label. And that label is concerning because then, as we know, that's going to give them a basis for impeachment. And there will be lunatics making arguments under the 14th Amendment saying this guy insurrected and stole an election in 2016, not 2016, because that was put in the factual basis of this criminal indictment. So Trump can appear virtually. They say that's an indication that it will not incarcerate him. If they were going to incarcerate him, they'd want him there in person and they could take him into custody at that time. Is that everyone agrees that there are risks of this. The fact that you're having to roll out the red carpet for the dude to get him sentenced, like, no, come over here. It's like those vans with free candy on the side. You're like, no, we're not trying to steal any kids. No, it's just a weird white van with free candy on the side. Come on in here. Saying, look, we're going to mitigate the risks of this. Why? Because there are risks. But letting the sentencing go forward sets the precedent that those are permissible risks. You can impose those impediments on the presidency. And so thus, Alvin Bragg's reliance on Judge Mercan's discretion, which is biased and partisan, based on the fact that he ranted against Trump and his ex-posts, and the fact that his daughter works for Democrats, and he gagged the president, and he made donations to Joe Biden. We're giving him discretion, and we're giving him a benefit of good faith, and that doesn't deviate from the Constitution? No. Bragg's minimization of the sentencing, it cuts against the claim that there is some urgent need to sentence Trump, right? The sentencing, generally, is to punish the offender. We can't let this guy run free. He's a danger. He stole an election. He falsified business records. He committed 34 felonies against the people of New York. And these lunatics have been screaming about this for years. No one's above the law, and he needs to go to jail, and blah, blah, blah. Now, all of a sudden, it's not a big problem. Now it's just, well, let's just get him, let's get this case finalized. It'll be good for Trump, in fact. That way, he'll have appellate rights all of a sudden. Yeah, right. Nor is it a virtue that sentencing will enable Trump to appeal. As the amicus brief of Ed Meese and Calabresi ably shows, as we talked about and read yesterday, that is nothing but an admission that criminal proceedings in this case will be ongoing after Trump's inauguration for president, right? Because he'll be appealing it while he is the president. Thus, far from weighing against itself, that point weighs in favor of Trump. If he's going to have to go through appeals, that means the criminal case could be opened. And as I mentioned earlier at the start of this, what happens if it's a remand for a new trial? Thus, far from weighing against relief, that point weighs in favor of granting the application. Should have been stayed. This whole case should have been dismissed. Trump said, in sum, Trump and the constitutional structure and the nation are irreparably harmed by letting this sentencing go forward. There are little to no harms in staying it at all. And as we continue, they say that Alvin Bragg is wrong. He says this case doesn't raise the question of whether an automatic stay is required. What? They misread your decision in Trump. Look, this court explained, and this is why, again, the Supreme Court emasculated itself again yesterday. This court explained that the evidentiary use, you guys wrote in your own words, that the evidentiary use of official presidential acts like they did in the Merchan case is inappropriate because it would permit a prosecutor to do indirectly what he cannot do directly. Okay, he could invite the jury to examine the acts for which the president is immune and prove his liability on any charge. So he could just go to the jury and other people and say, what do you think? Was that official or not? There's no distinction between the prosecutor or the jury holding the president liable for those acts which he cannot be found liable for. That's what immunity is. He's allowed to do those things. The prosecutor can't say, I can prosecute you for those things. Not allowed. So he can't export that to a jury to do it either. Nor does the current posture in this case matter. It doesn't matter that the trial is over. There's only one thing left to do: sentencing. Then there are direct appeals and thus potential future trial proceedings. Review and resolution of Trump's immunity claim adjudicates the propriety of those proceedings, and that necessitates a stay. And Bragg also ignores that in the qualified immunity context, which means, remember, we've got absolute immunity, presumptive immunity, and no immunity, this court has rejected the argument that you lose your right to an appeal by moving past a certain stage. Here, there is no reason to deny Trump's right to an interlocutory appeal and review because the criminal process has now reached this point. Doesn't matter. Even more irrelevant is the trial court's suggestion, Merchan, that he has discretion, that it's inclined to oppose a sentence and disinclined to incarcerate Trump. Bragg does not say that it's binding. Everybody knows it's not binding. And that suggestion concedes the constitutional issue with sentencing Trump. It's little better than a promise of good faith from a man who has no good faith at all. And lastly, Alvin Bragg concedes that New York courts do have the power to review Trump's claims on an interlocutory basis and issue a stay. Trump has a right to presidential immunity and immediate review of that claim. And Bragg at no point has no valid excuse for the New York refusal to honor this. Its argument admits his own violation, but they're doing it anyways. And so Bragg argues that Trump's claim of immunity as sitting president means he should receive immunity. During the elect period, Bragg called that baseless. They say that's hard to see on multiple levels. Why? That question has never been decided before. And just because it hasn't been decided before doesn't mean it's frivolous. In fact, a situation like this has never happened before, Bragg. And so furthermore, that only the current incumbent is vested with executive power does not mean that there are no Article 2 functions that could also apply to the president-elect. Thwarting an efficacious transition impairs the current vesting of the executive power, right? If you're a football quarterback and you're throwing to your receiver, you need both sides of that equation to work. it harms the quarterback if the receiver can't catch the ball. It hurts the quarterback. Currently, the executive branch is under the quarterback of Joe Biden. That's why we're losing every single game by 50 points. But what's happening is we need the receiver, which is Trump, to catch the ball. And if we have Alvin Bragg and Fannie Willis with tire irons kneecapping Trump multiple times, that is not good for America. We can't win games. It would be strange if the state was constitutionally allowed to prevent a president-elect from taking his oath because it rushed his trial and incarcerated him. That'd be ridiculous. They're pretty close to that. And even if the state released a president-elect to allow him to take his oath, what if he was incarcerated? It's illogical to say that a president-elect will not have an effect on his power. Incarceration will surely impair the president. And Trump has already pointed out the national security ramifications of this, and Bragg has no answers to that. Now, to say that such results do not offend Article 2 blinks reality, but that is what Alvin Bragg is saying is happening. And Bragg's argument also ignores that criminal proceedings in their effect don't end with criminal judgment or the inauguration. Direct appeals are available. And then Trump now has to choose between immunity and criminal process. And there's still going to be a public stigma, as well as all of the appeals that are happening here. And so at its core, Alvin Bragg disregards this court's methodology of balancing these things. The balancing is done by considering the special nature of the presidency, and as this case illustrates, allowing a state to subject a president to the criminal process can cripple the vesting power of the current executive and the incoming administration. And this court has routinely and properly prioritized the effective functioning of government. And Bragg, by contrast, disregards that clear line. In this court's decision of two foundational errors, it errs as a matter of category by talking about immunity as something that derives from the fact that a person is president or president-elect. But that question is relevant to the immunity. That it is relevant is not the distortion of his decision-making per se, but it would interfere with his ability to do his job. Trump has shown that multiple times here. Bragg's second error is relying on steps that the trial court has made to accommodate Trump. The accommodations show there's a problem in the first place. And so we're thus far from undermining Trump's case. Bragg's argument indicates he's out of step and Trump is right. And so we're keeping our eyes on the cables.
And we're pretty vocal on that. So
here's what we've got.
Anything, right? We're shipping.
You jump through some hoops, you come back, and that'll be the end of your sentence. This is even better than that. It's essentially your sentence is no sentence. There are no conditions attached to that sentence. No probation, no picking up trash on the side of the road, no community service, no nothing. That is your punishment. No punishment. So the judge needs to put some things on the record. The law requires that. He has to explain why he's giving this sentence. That might take some time, but other than that, this may be shorter than your average sentencing hearing.
All right. We'll be following this as it happens. MSNBC legal analyst Danny Savallo. Thank you.
Okay, so here we've got some updates from our friends who were in the courtroom. You can see that Adam Klasfeld does have some reporting happening here, and we'll catch up with Inner City Press as well. But Klasfeld was here. He said, Judge Merchan suggested Trump's lawyers aim to create a chilling effect on the third branch of government, asking questions about that. Now we've got 7 minutes ago, Alvin Bragg's team entered the courtroom, took their seats at the persecution table. He says Trump's attorney, Emil Bove, who's going to serve as the principal assistant deputy AG, is the first and only person from Trump's team to take a seat at the defense table. The rest of them might be there via Zoom. Bragg finally entered the courtroom and has now taken a seat behind these prosecutors in the gallery. Klasfeld says Trump's video feed is visible on the monitor at the defense table. On the screen, Trump is seated behind his lead attorney, Todd Blanche, who's also his nominee for deputy AG. There are two American flags behind the president. So it's happening right now. Looks like the cables don't have any special access. They're still doing analysis.
Angered about this entire category of cases, knowing.
So no one's got the audio as far as we can tell yet. They're just reporting on the scene and a lot of commercials over there. So we'll keep our eye on what's happening here. We also were paying attention to Tyler McBrien, and we're seeing what his post had to say about this. He says, The press has entered the courtroom. We're all waiting for things to kick off. Justice Merchan, known for his punctuality, it's now past the 9:30 time. No Secret Service means no jamming because Trump's not there. So as I knock on the wooden door, the Wi-Fi should hold up unless anything changes. 30 minutes ago, he says, in his January 6th decision, third decision, Trump is now going to face unconditional discharge, and it's going to end things. And what unconditional discharge means is everything's going away. When a sentence of unconditional discharge, which is imposed for a felony, the court shall set forth the record for the reason for its actions. Unconditional discharge means a sentence shall be released with respect to the conviction for which the sentence was imposed without imprisonment, without fine or probation. A sentence of unconditional discharge is a final judgment of conviction. Okay, so that's what they want right there. A final judgment of conviction. So they want that to stick. Now, the first few chuckles came through the courtroom. Court staff members started testing the sound, saying testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. He said, when in the course of human events, and there were some laughs out there. Let's check in on the cable, see what they got for us.
And I think the conservatives on the court would like to have heard or would like to have given Trump the relief that he was seeking, which I think would have been better for the country. But on balance, I think what happened is they've basically locked Judge Merchan into his commitment to issue a no jail sentence, what they call an unconditional discharge. No jail, no probation, no fine, no anything. And they're allowing Trump to appear virtually. So that answers the complaint that the imposition on the transition was too arduous. It's not going to be much of an imposition. Now, Trump doesn't want to be a convicted felon, and the important thing here is, as a formal technical matter, the judgment of conviction gets entered once you get sentenced, and that's what he's been trying to avoid. But at the same time, Democrats called him a convicted felon throughout the campaign, and the public elected him. So I think while this is personally, I think it's very important to Trump. I think in the greater scheme of things, this is going to be quick. It's really not going to hurt so much, and it won't make a bit of difference a few months from now.
Trey, his reaction to the Supreme Court was pretty mild. He said, I respect the court's opinion, but they can still overturn this entire thing by going on appeal.
Yeah, I think Andy's point is a conviction is not final until you're sentenced. So,
all right, straight, yeah. All right, so here we got now some more from what's happening inside the courtroom. We still don't have any audio. Audio apparently is being recorded, but it will be released at a further date or later today. But here's what's happening inside. So Tyler McBrien is there. He says the pews are filled with familiar faces of reporters and the aisles with familiar officers. The atmosphere is light and collegial. As we walked in, a court officer said, 2 months together and we haven't seen each other since. I replied, you don't call, you don't write, what gives? 9:22. Prosecutors entered the courtroom with America's favorite paralegals in tow. In prosecution, I see seated from left to right, Josh Steinglass, Conroy, and Hoffinger. Maybe he's a fan of them. At 9:25, Emil Bove enters and takes a seat at the defense table. Now, there's some uncertainty among the press where virtual Trump will appear. There are 4 big screens facing the press and another on the ground facing away. 9:27, Alvin Bragg and his team enter unassumingly, and they take their seat in the pews. Tyler says, I can barely make out the 2 small screens. There's virtual Trump, someone next to him, probably Todd Blanche, but his visibility is not that great. 4 seconds ago at 9:31, he wrote, the photographers enter, snap photos of the lone Bove and back of the screens. It's a little awkward and silly looking. He says, Matthew Colangelo, Biden's prosecutor, has now entered the scene. I had missed him before. 9:34 comes out just minutes ago. Clerk says, all right. For this guy. Judge Merchan walks out. He takes the bench. Please be seated. He said, oh, good morning, everybody. All right, now we can see Trump on the screen. Trump and Blanche clearly now on the screen above Merchan's head. Merchan makes clear that Blanche is appearing virtually with Trump. Okay, good morning. This is the time set for the matter of New York versus Donald Trump. Case number, whatever. Appearances, please. Prosecutors come up. Todd Blanche makes his appearance for the president. Mercan's noting, just to be clear for the record, we're holding this appearance virtually because I'm a coward. That's not my words, not his. He says Trump elected to waive personal appearance, and so that's why we're going to be here virtually. Says Trump does not want to show up. I gave him the ability to not be here. He's not going to be here. Trump is seated, and on the Zoom, red tie scowls in the frame, says Tyler. Next to Blanche, blue tie, also scowling. The two men look down to the side and down again. Adam Klasfeld's reporting. Mercan took the bench, addresses Trump's attorney, again appearing virtually. Here's the latest. 2 American flags behind Trump. And just like during Trump's trial, a pool of photographers entered the photograph the defendant. But this time, their cameras don't face human beings, but a large monitor with Trump's and his lawyer. They don't know, Trump and his lawyers, that they're being photographed, probably. Mercan comes in, all rise, and the proceedings start. Now we've got inner city press reporting the same. You're going to hear me say a couple things over and over, but here is what he's reporting. Trump's on the screen, Emil Bove in the courtroom. Virtual sentencing is permitted, says the judge here in New York. I'm allowed to do this. And please, and remember we brought this point up before, that there wasn't even enough time to prepare sentencing memos. So Emil Bove, Todd Blanche would ordinarily prepare a memo, give my client an unconditional discharge, right? Or give my client 1 year probation, or give him 2 days jail or whatever, right? Depending on the client and the sentence. Same thing with the prosecutor. They come back out. They want 100 years in prison. They want the death penalty. They want Trump going away for. So they would prepare a report. They would all go to the judge. Then the judge would read them all, including probation, which should be like this independent government neutral report. So he doesn't have the other two. So he just gives them probation and says, why don't you just read that? And so we're going to keep our eye on all of these feeds. Let's check in with the cable, see what they've got for us.
And then you get.
But in this case, isn't it a little bit unusual? The Supreme Court has discretion as well to say, and yet we understand the timeline here.
There's an instinctive federal or presumptive federal notion that you shouldn't interfere with state criminal proceedings. You're dealing with lawyers. Justice Barrett has been notorious for this in her time in the court. She doesn't like the emergency docket. She doesn't like things to come right to the court. She likes it to go through in regular order, and she likes to honor presumptions like the Fed should stay out of it unless they really have to get into it.
Anything on that, Trey?
Yeah, she doesn't like the word interlocutory. The normal process is you wait until there's a conviction after sentencing, and then you can appeal everything. I do think there's some reticence to extending this immunity to someone who is not yet the commander-in-chief of the president. I don't know that he will prevail on the merits. I think his best argument is you have made me a felon and I'm about to have control over every weapon in our arsenal. I don't know if they raise that on appeal, but that to me is his best argument.
That's an interesting argument in addition to, yeah. Okay. So anyways, here's what CNN's reporting. They say they got handed the probation report. Mercan said, why don't you take some time to look at it? Todd Blanche, who's appearing there, says, yep, Your Honor, I got a copy of the probation report this morning. I read it. Now on the screen, there are 4 boxes. Judge Mercan is on the upper left. Trump and his attorney, Todd Blanche, are on the upper right. Beneath them, his attorney, Emil Bove. On the lower left is the prosecution table. Trump is staring straight ahead while Mercan talks to Blanche. More updates. Judge says, let's impose sentence, please, says Mercan. It's going to be a short hearing. Trump attorney says probation report has some out-of-date facts. He says, Your Honor, yeah, I've had a chance to review the report, says Todd Blanche. There are a few out-of-date facts in the probation report about other cases. Because of the date of the report, however, none of those details affect today's hearings, and so we can proceed and move forward. Now we go back to our friends. Let's see what Inner City Press has here for us. From the court, handed a probation report. Judge Mercan, Mr. Blanche, Trump's defense attorney, any objections to the report? Your Honor, it is out of date. But given what we expect to happen today, where you're not going to be able to do anything to him at all, we have no objection. Now here, Trump is leaning in towards the camera. Trump's looking in here. You're in big trouble. You're all in big trouble. Trump leaning in. Blanche is leaning back. towards the two American flags from Inner City Press. Let's see what the latest is here from Klasfeld. And his most recent report, All Rise. That's what we've got from him. Things moving slowly. Tyler's writing, Merchan asked Blanche to confirm receipt of the report. He's got a copy. Your Honor, some of the facts and procedural history not up to date, but I don't have anything else to put on the record. How about you, Alvin Bragg? Anything else to report or for you guys to put on the record here? Steinglass says, he's a prosecutor. Just a moment, Your Honor, reviewing this. Merchan looks out over the courtroom, stoic but calm. In other words, his typical posture, aka like a total. The prosecution addresses the court before sentencing. Government stands up. Steinglass says, Your Honor, the state agrees the court can impose a sentence. You can impose a sentence, the range being anywhere from prison under the law to a variety of non-incarcerable sentences, anywhere in between. And due to the unique posture, though, of defendant's status as president-elect, this hurt for them, the people recommend a sentence of unconditional discharge. Unconditional discharge is what the prosecutor says. We hate Trump, but he says, but I do want to remind you, Your Honor, and he's putting all this down in the record, okay? So he's making his little speech here. This is his little dumb sentencing speech. But we do want to remind the court that the jury found Trump guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business record and of the sanctity of the jury's verdict that was found in the due course of New York law and the deference that may be afforded to it. Okay, so this is him coping extremely hard. Coping. He's like, it's unconditional discharge, but he's a bad person and the jury found him guilty. He says Trump's conduct before and during and after the trial merits consideration. And instead of preserving, here we go. Instead of preserving and defending our Constitution, Trump, the once and future president of the USA, has engaged in a coordinated campaign to undermine his own legitimacy. Okay, here's a ranting, whiny baby prosecutor who lost. Hey, bro, he's going to be your president for 4 years, and you're in big trouble for this, by the way. What you're doing here is abusing your public office, and so we're going to look into all this. So I hope you're enjoying yourself and this little speech, because you got 4 years of having to answer for what you've done in this case. And we are remembering who you are. So just be forewarned, enjoy it because it's not going to last long. So Tyler says, he says, and Trump has not shown any remorse at all. Of course not. He won the whole country and instead has shown disdain for our institutions and the rule of law, all for his own ends. Prosecutor whining, crying. Trump said, Your Honor, corrupt. He used the word rigged. He called it a witch hunt. He called it a sham. Too many times to count. And Your Honor, his rhetoric has only ratcheted it up since this verdict. Oh, yeah. And now he's going to have the presidency too. So if you think that was bad, just wait till we have a legitimate criminal investigation. Those are just words on a page. Wait till we start actually investigating your criminality and what you've done, Joshua Steinglass, what you've done, Matthew Colangelo, what Alvin Bragg has been colluded to do by the Biden administration. We got all your numbers. So we hope you're enjoying this. He also says, and Your Honor, Trump's actions in the proceedings constitute a direct attack on the rule of law itself. Moreover, Trump has publicly threatened to retaliate against the prosecution. If you broke the law, which in my opinion you did, you're going to be investigated. There's a new sheriff in town, bro. Trump's coming in with a new AG, a new FBI, and a bunch of new things. So you better hope you didn't break the law at all, because there will be a retaliatory measure to prosecuting you, because people who break the law are not above the law, as you've set the standard. Steinglass says, such threats are designed to have a chilling effect, Your Honor. They're going to intimidate those of us who have the responsibility to enforce our laws. What laws? Spreadsheet violations with convicted perjurer Michael Cohen as your star witness, with porn star Stormy Daniels, who manipulated her entire testimony, enforced the law that it was rejected by Alvin Bragg until Matthew Colangelo came over from the DOJ. Intimidate. You guys gagged Trump. He couldn't even talk about this case. Intimidate those who have the responsibility to enforce our laws. You guys brought in a perjurer in your trial and made him a star witness who was convicted of perjury and admitted to lying to a federal judge in your trial. You don't enforce any laws. You're political hacks. This is just a screed in the hopes that they will ignore Trump's transgressions because they fear he's too powerful to be subject to the rule of law like the rest of us. He says, Your Honor, put simply, this defendant has caused enduring damage to the public perception of the criminal justice system. That is rich. They did this. They have wrecked their own institution, and they broke glass in case of emergency. They thought the emergency was Trump, and they've wrecked their own credibility. Trump couldn't have done this much damage to the justice system if he tried. Their prosecutions brought them down, hoisted by their own petard, as they say. He says this is not a typical case. We must be respectful of the office of the presidency and be mindful that Trump will be inaugurated in 10 days. And so even though he is the worst in the world and he attacked our institution and attacked our democracy and blah, 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 the most practical sentence, says Steinglass, the prosecutor, is an unconditional discharge. Okay. So even though he's the worst of the worst, we are such bad prosecutors that we're going to have to let him go. Less than a speeding ticket. Okay. Not even getting points on his license. Prosecutor says the American public has a right to a presidency unencumbered by ongoing trials. And so imposing a sentence now ensures that finality. And he emphasizes this, okay? He says, and it cements Trump's status as a convicted felon. Okay, he's like super excited about it because this is all Steinglass has in his life, is going after the president. Cements his status as a convicted felon while he pursues appeals, okay? Just dripping with contempt. That's all they want. Convicted felon. And can we just be clear on this? So they're acknowledging that we were 100% right this entire time during this election. Cements his status as a convicted felon. Oh, so it wasn't cemented before, right? So that entire time, every time Raskin and Cheney and Goldman and Kamala and all of these lunatic lefties were screaming, a convicted felon. And we were sitting here, no, he's not. How do you vote in Florida? How come he can do other things that a felon cannot do? Because he wasn't a convicted felon at the time. This is what it's all about. They're liars. They just make it up as they go. And they're doing it here. But that's what they really want. And I hope they enjoy it, man. It better be good because it doesn't bother us. Okay, the reason I didn't want Trump to be labeled a convicted felon is because it would hurt them so badly to not have that. Like they want it, they're label people. Their whole lives are based on labels. They change everything based on labels. They think that all of their problems will be solved if they can just have the right label and if you acknowledge them by that label. So it matters to them. I was thinking about this. Barack Obama thinks he was a great man because he was the president. And that's inverted. You become the president so you can establish greatness. Just the fact that you became the president doesn't make you a great person, is I think what many people are acknowledging. Okay, that's fine. Call him whatever you want. I don't care. He's going to be the president and he's going to be back in charge. He's going to have the power and he's going to come and investigate everybody who thinks that they are accomplishing something with this little charade. Reporting continues. So Blanche now comes up, Trump's defense attorney. Thanks for your little stupid speech there, Joshua. Calm down now. Trump's attorney comes up, says, Your Honor, look, we're going to start off by saying we very much disagree with the prosecution. This case was not appropriately brought. And he's talking to Judge Mercant, who is one of the biggest hacks in law. Says Trump's attorney, Todd Blanche, going to the Attorney General's office. Your Honor, the timing of this trial, the fact that multiple prosecutors had already decided not to bring charges, this case was started again for the third time when Biden's prosecutor, Matthew Colangelo, came over from Joe's house and initiated this case because they needed 4 and counting prosecutions to try to stop their opponent. Now, a lot of what the government just said in their little tirade there just presupposes that this case is legally appropriate and that the charges that were brought by the people were consistent with the laws of New York. But that's not true at all, and probably went into this. As we know, the law and the law. Now, again, we very much disagree with that, and we're going to be appealing all of that. Now, many legal experts agree with us. They share the same views. And based on the facts that were established at trial and the legal basis for which these facts were brought, the majority of American people also agree this case should not have been brought. Trump just got elected, and hope you enjoy that, Judge. Now, this is a sad day for Trump and his family. And in his view, this is a sad day for our country, Judge. This was a case, without a doubt, that was brought by a DA who promised to go after Trump if he was elected. He said it openly, campaigned on it. We got video clips. Your Honor, we've seen them. America saw them. That's a sad state of affairs. That's not something that should be happening in America. And Trump shares that view. And he shares this view that this will never happen again in this country. Do you understand? That's his view. This will never happen again, Judge. Blanche continues to speak slowly and deliberately. Trump leans forward, looking bored. But then Trump speaks. The president-elect, number 47, speaks during his historic hack sentencing brought by a corrupt judge and perverted New York legal system. The president speaks. He says, "Thank you, Your Honor. This has been a terrible experience and setback for New York and the New York court system. This was a case Bragg did not want to bring. It was inappropriately handled. A gentleman from a law firm came in and acted as a DA, and he was a criminal, or almost a criminal. It was someone involved with my political opponent." Trump's now talking about business records and legal expenses and more, and that they're put down by accountants. They're called a legal expense, Your Honor. That's what I paid. And for this, I got indicted. It's incredible, actually, says Trump, that we're here. The top legal experts, highly respected people, virtually everyone I know of, not one, someone chuckles, these people are not exactly friends of mine, all said this case should not have been brought. Turley, Jonathan Turley, Judge Rifkin, Eli Honig from CNN, Alan Dershowitz. I get indicted for business records. Everyone should be accurate, Trump says. This is a witch hunt. And by the way, we've won a ton of votes in the election. Everyone knows that we won. Swing votes, all 7 states, Hispanics, African Americans, everybody, Latinos, everybody won. It says Trump is winning majorly. Now let's see what inner city press is reporting for us to see if we can parse through another set of notes today. Copies coming in. Trump is now speaking. Before Trump speaks, Blanche said, Your Honor, the American people got to decide as the trial was held during the election. Trump was elected. This DA promised he'd go after Trump, and that is sad. Trump now speaking. Your Honor, this was a case that Alvin Bragg did not want to bring. He thought it was inappropriately handled before he got in. Then they brought in Pomerantz and Carrie Dunn, those two from a law firm, and it was criminal what they did. Let's go, Mr. President. You're right. It was criminal. He was involved with my political opponent, and what I paid was a legal expense. And experts who are not friends of mine all say this case should have been brought, not have been brought. There were legal expenses. I paid them. This was done so I would lose the election. Obviously, that did not work, okay? They brought this case to make me lose, and I have now not lost. I have, in fact, won. Top legal experts agree. He says, voters have been watching the trial, says the president, so they understood it. I wasn't allowed to use the lawyer-client privilege or use the discrediting info from the Southern District of New York, which was brought against Michael Cohen. He's a man who has no standing and who was completely disbarred, says Trump. Trump's talking about Michael Cohen. He was allowed to talk as though he's George Washington. And guess what? He's not George Washington. said the president. The first president in history to be under a gag order. I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong. They talk about business records, but they were extremely accurate, and I had nothing to even do with them. And one of our largest, most important cities is now burning to the ground, said Trump. With all the wars and horrible things going on, I got indicted for calling a legal expense. You're kidding. He now says that the DOJ was involved in the New York case. And Tyler says, without evidence. I've got plenty of evidence. Matthew Colangelo left the DOJ and came over here. How's that for evidence? They call it lawfare, he says, and ends by saying he was treated very unfairly. And I'm done. Trump's done. Merchan says, thank you, Mr. President, and begins almost immediately. So Trump's statement is now over. Let's see what Klasfeld is reporting on what the latest is. Trump says, this has been a very terrible experience. It has been a setback for New York and the New York court system. Other quotes. As usual, Trump calls it a political witch hunt because, of course, it is. And Trump's lead attorney said he disagreed with everything else that was reported by the prosecutor. Let's see what CNN has for us. They've got some recent updates, some more from Trump. Let's recap what they captured from him. And Trump's lawyers plan to appeal the verdict. Trump begins his statement at today's hearing, saying, this has been a very terrible experience. I think it's been a setback for New York and the New York court system. This is a case that Alvin Bragg did not want to bring. It's been a political witch hunt, and it was done to damage my reputation. Trump's going after the indictment, talking about false business. Nobody wants to report what he's saying verbatim there. They say, Trump said legal fees were put down as legal expenses by accountants. They weren't put down by me. They didn't call them construction, concrete work, or anything. They called it a legal expense. And for this, I got indicted? He says, it's incredible, actually. And millions of votes have come for me, and we won all 7 swing states. And Judge, they've been watching your trial, okay? So they understood it. We've been covering it here at length, exposing it. And that's right, I think people are seeing it. Latest update, Trump says, the fact is, I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong. And the judge comes right back immediately and says, thank you, Mr. Trump. He says, the imposition of sentence is one of the most difficult and significant decisions that any criminal court judge is called upon to make. What? They just got done telling us that this was a meaningless, useless hearing. This judge is so inconsistent, it's embarrassing. One of the most significant decisions that any criminal judge is going to... You just said it's not significant. You said it takes an hour. It's no burden at all. It's almost of no consequence to Trump. You can't even impose a penalty. Now, all of a sudden, it's significant. It's significant because this is your big climax event. We know how excited you've been for this. Been waiting for this for years. Trump calls out his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, as well, calling him not George Washington. These updates are coming in out of order. As Judge Merchan speaks, President-elect Trump is leaning forward. He's alternating between looking at Merchan and looking down and away from the screen. Let's see where we're at with Tyler. Merchan begins almost immediately. He writes, Merchan. Okay, so Trump wasn't done yet. Calling out Cohen, I was the first president in history to be under a gag order. I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong. They talk about business records, but they were extremely accurate. I had nothing to do with them. Meanwhile, one of our largest, most important cities is burning to the ground, says Trump. With all the wars and horrible things going on, I got indicted for calling a legal expense. Merchan begins. Judge says, I start today by noting that we took an unusual step to alert Trump of the sentence ahead of time, just to get him to show up. And I'm explaining the reasoning behind the sentencing and why we're doing it this way, why Trump will be having a discharge. He solemnly begins an unconditional discharge. He solemnly begins, says Tyler, he says, the purpose of sentencing is the judges decide. And in my time on the bench, opines Merchan, I've been called on to exercise this weighty responsibility for defendants ranging from nonviolent crimes to heinous crimes. It's always difficult, says the judge. And this has been a truly extraordinary case, says Merchan, citing media attention and security. But the trial was something of a paradox because it was more special or unique than the others conducted during the same time. It was no more special or unique. It was extraordinary, right? I got all this attention, but it's the same as any other. It's the same burden of proof, same procedure, same jury of ordinary citizens. No, they're not. They're Democrats from New York and Manhattan. And it was all conducted pursuant to the rules of procedure guided by the law, says Merchan. So he's enjoying himself. Okay, this is where the judge is, I did a great job. He's just he's really enjoying himself. He praises the clerks, the court reporters, court officers, and everybody. You guys are amazing. We're amazing. We did a great job fighting against Adolf Trump. Now, while one can argue the trial was somewhat ordinary, says the judge, anything but, the same cannot be said about sentencing, says Merchan, because of the office you once occupied and will soon occupy once again, Mr. President, or Trump. He's probably calling him Defendant Trump. Now, to be sure, it is the legal protection that is afforded by the office, says Merchan, by the office, and not the occupant of the office. But they're concerned with the occupant. They hate Trump. And what they're doing is harming the office. But they don't care. He says that any and all aggravating and mitigating factors would inform my decision. So some things increase the penalty, some would decrease the penalty. He says some of them are articulated by the Sandoval ruling, and some of them I talked about in my 1216 ruling, and some of them in my J3rd ruling. But the protections that are afforded to the executive is a factor that overrides all others. Okay, so when we get the audio of this, he's going to say, you did a bunch of bad things. And I know that. But the executive branch overrides that. This is the supremacy clause in action. Now, despite the extraordinary breadth of those protections, one power that they do not provide Trump is the power to erase a jury verdict. Donald Trump, the ordinary citizen, the criminal defendant, says the judge, would not be entitled to such considerable protection, says Merchan. And these protections are extended to the office holder of the presidency, far exceed those of ordinary citizens. And through that lens and that reality, this court must determine a lawful sentence. So I want to send you to prison forever, but I can't. And so this court has determined that the only lawful sentence that permits entry of judgment and conviction without encroaching on the highest office in the land is the sentence of unconditional discharge, says the judge. So no penalty at all, no fine, no probation, nothing. They're just going to slap him with that convicted felon label. That's from Tyler. And he says, of course, Judge Merchan imposes the sentence, unconditional discharge, to all of Trump's 34 counts. He says, sir, I wish you Godspeed as you assume your second term in office. And that might be the end of the hearing. He called him sir, unconditional discharge. It's simultaneously infuriating and pathetic. And it's really pathetic that they would go through all of this just for this. This is what they're so happy about. They're strange folks. Merchan hits his climax, his climactic event. After all this is over, he calls him, sir, I wish you Godspeed. After he just got done taking a tire iron repeatedly to his knees for his own self-gratification, like a sick person. That is what Tyler Bryant reported. We do appreciate the reporting from Tyler McBride. He says, the court has determined the only lawful action is what it is. Merchan takes leave. Virtual Trump and Blanche disappear from the screens with a bloop. Prosecution exits in orderly fashion. Emil Bove is hanging out, lingering by the defense table, looks at his phone, and that's it. We're allowed to leave. Exits at 10:09. Press gets up, packs up, and they're gone. So let's see what else we are picking up from the other reporting crew. Trump continued to report. He says, I was under a gag order. I assume I'm still under it. I don't know. I'm totally innocent, and it doesn't sound like we heard about the gag order. So my argument would be the gag order is now closed. It's now done. Case is closed. Everything is there's no reason for the gag order anymore. It's final. I did nothing wrong. The business records were accurate. They were done by a bookkeeper, corroborated. And with all that's happening, said Trump, there's a city burning to the ground. You've got a gentleman sitting right there, says Trump, who was with the DOJ. He got them to move on it. They call it lawfare. I'd just like to explain I was treated very unfairly. Thank you very much. Judge says, thank you, Mr. Trump. So I have sentenced countless defendants, sex trafficking, homicide. This circumstance is unique. This has been an extraordinary case. Media, but once the courtroom doors closed, it was just a trial. We had jury selection. Judge said, it's my obligation to consider all aggravating factors already in my Sandoval rulings and other rulings, and the protections afforded to the office of the president are not a mitigating factor, but they are a legal mandate. And this power doesn't include erasing a jury verdict. Trump's leaning back. Both have American flag lapel pins. Judge says unconditional discharge has been affirmed as appropriate, and so I impose it. Godspeed. Over from Matthew Russell Lee. And Klasfeld, reporting he was also there on scene, called it the only lawful sentence he can impose, unconditional discharge. And his final words, sir, I wish you Godspeed as you pursue your second term in office. Thank you. That's it. Sentencing is over. Trump gets no penalties at all. Merchan calls him sir, gets out of there. Says, I don't need to repeat the aggravating factors. I've already written about those. But the extraordinary legal protections overrides everything else. It doesn't reduce the seriousness of the crime or justify its commission in any way, said Merchan. But ordinary citizens don't get those privileges. And the citizenry decided you should once again receive the benefits of those protections. You are right. We did agree to that. And that is the sentence. So it is now done. Now, those liars who got done the last election saying that Trump was a convicted felon, now they're right. Now they can say that with some degree of accuracy. But let's see if the president has responded to this in any way. And let's see what some of the cables are saying, because this was not quite the dressing down that we thought we were going to get from the judge. In fact, sounds like we got no dressing down from the judge. It was just the whiny prosecutor who had to go on his little lecture and make himself feel good. But this case is now over. The silver lining in this might be that the appeal goes back up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court looks at it and says, now we'll dismiss it. We didn't want to create this new president-elect immunity or intervene so quickly, but now once it goes back up, we can dismiss it later. Of course, not much from the president, as this is all just breaking right now. Let's check in on the cables.
Well, what are they going to say then? They
Let's see what they say.
They gave their imprimatur to the process.
Mark Levin's calling in.
They said, let the process play out. That's all we know from this order of 3 sentences or whatever it is. Let the process play out. No, you don't let a corrupt process that these gentlemen have been talking about from beginning to end play out, particularly when you're talking about an incoming president of the United States, where the appellate process for this corrupt process will be going on while he's president of the United States. So this court had an extraordinary responsibility, like it rarely does, to set this straight. And now the precedent is set. That is, that you will be able to drag candidates, maybe for president, some DA, through a corrupt process that has to play out all the way to the end until the Supreme Court's going to look at it. I strongly disagree with what Roberts and Barrett
totally agree.
Throw in with the 3 typical hardliners on the left.
They embarrassed themselves.
I strongly agree with, I think, is the impression of the 4 other justices. It was close. It was 5-4, who probably said, no, we've got to fix this situation now. We cannot give our court imprimatur to this process. They did not defend the federal judiciary. They did not defend the federal constitutional system. They did not defend themselves. And even when they eventually take up this case, it's far more complicated now for them to explain why they're taking up the case and why, God willing, if the state appellate courts don't, they're going to reverse. I think it's an absolute abomination.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Dana, you want to weigh in here?
How are they going to explain themselves?
Ask you, does this mean that the gag order is now lifted? I'm assuming so, because he was allowed to talk, and I'm sure he's got a lot of pent-up thoughts.
I don't know that it came up today.
All of this, but maybe wants to move forward because he's got a lot on his plate as he tries to hit the ground running in 10 days.
I don't know what they've done. If I'm the president of the United States, I ignore the gag order. I tell the judge, you go ahead and hold me in contempt if that's what you want to do, and then I will litigate that issue to the end of the earth. He's the president of the United States. He needs to be able to speak freely. That gag order was just part of a long list of unconstitutional acts
to
by this
cover
man,
up the
and he
judge's
should
own
violate.
corruption.
And if the
Gag
judge doesn't
Trump so he
like
couldn't
it,
talk about
too
his
damn
daughter.
bad. What's he going to do? Send him to prison? Then the Supreme Court will take up the case. Then he can resolve the matter. What Merchan did here, the reason he didn't imprison him or give him an ankle bracelet or really penalize him in any way was because he knew the Supreme Court then would take up the case, because he would be interfering with the function of the federal government. He would be interfering with the office of the president. So what does he do? This guy's a schemer. He says, you know what? I'll put the scarlet letter on, but I'm not going to punish him, quote unquote, because then I will have a problem with the Supreme Court. And just briefly, think about that. In other words, if he said, I'm going to imprison the president, or he says he's going to get an ankle bracelet, or I'm going to fine him for $500,000, or I'm going to do all these other things, does anybody really doubt that the Supreme Court wouldn't take that up? The Supreme Court would take it up. And it would take it up in part because of a half-century-old 2000 memo by the Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel.
They didn't even address that.
Merchan says, I'm going to skate this. And with the abomination to me on top of everything else with that short order was they actually cite the fact that really Merchan's not going to punish him as one of the reasons to let it go.
They cited it.
They were played. Those four justices in the minority, they knew that. They saw that. I'm sure they did. And again, I think a Rehnquist would have seen it. A Scalia would have seen it. They had more reason to take this case than they did Bush versus Gore, and now we're stuck with it.
Yeah, it's bad.
Mark Levin, thank you so much for joining us. We just showed you some video of Todd Blanche, President Trump's lawyer, who has left the courtroom. Andy, where does this go from here? If the gag doesn't exist anymore, what would you do? What would you suggest?
I think finality for the goose is finality for the gander.
Yeah.
Final means it's over, which means Merchan doesn't have any jurisdiction over this case anymore. It's going up on appeal. The case is over. That's what they said they wanted. They needed to impose sentence here so he could enter the judgment, and that would be the end of the case. But to my mind, the end of the case means it's the end of Merchan's jurisdiction to tell President Trump anything. He'll just have to wait for the next case.
Yeah, but he can appeal it. He appeals it, and maybe they say there was an error with some of that evidence that came in. So maybe that Madeleine Westerhout and that Hope Hicks testimony should not have come in. It was official acts. Merchan, just do the trial over again. We remand for a new trial. Happens all the time. You remand for a new trial, and you have a whole new trial again. Was the case really closed? If Trump doesn't appeal it, then yeah, it's closed. He'll be stuck with that felony conviction. But if he appeals it, it's still open. There's still a whole bunch of other things. Technically, the felony conviction will stand, but he'll post a bond, he'll appeal, post a bond, and it's still legally possibly open, right? There's a whole different slew of things that could happen, and it's not really closed because Trump has indicated to us that he will appeal this. And we saw that from the president himself in his own post. And so now I'm trying to dig up here the president's, so here's what he said, right? Already said before the sentencing occurred, I will be appealing this case and I'm confident justice will prevail. So he'll continue to fight this. That doesn't lead to finality. So we'll keep our eye on it. Let's see what else we've got from the cables.
Your thoughts about all of this, because it merely looks like Alvin Bragg and Judge Merchan went on a big game hunt. They bagged their trophy and they hung him on the wall with the scarlet letter F on his forehead now. It has no practical purpose in terms of the president's abilities to be able to carry out his duties as president. But as Trey pointed out, the felony conviction follows him around until it's either overturned and until the day he dies. So how do you view all of this?
Yeah, I think you're right. To me, it was an obvious sham from the beginning. The fact that you had to cobble together a novel form of charging him and take all these non-felonies and turn them into a felony.
We'll see when Trump files his notice of appeal. That stuff could hit today, as far as we know. Let's see what CNN's saying.
That today, he was saying, though, that there were other factors that had more weight than that, and that was the fact that Trump was going to be resuming the presidency, but the judge underscoring that it's the office of the presidency that has this extraordinary status, not the occupant of that office. So really trying to underscore that this was about the presidency and not that protections were because of the presidency, not Donald Trump, who he said as an ordinary citizen would not have any of these protections. Now, the judge did issue this sentence of an unconditional discharge. He was underscoring that he felt it was important today. The people had voted and spoken. Trump was going into the office, and of the importance of the office, this was the most viable sentence he said he could issue to bring finality to this case, to lock.
All right, so here is the photo of what it looked like inside the courtroom. Those two good-looking gentlemen, baby. We're all felons now, baby, all in America. You're a felon, you're a felon, you're a felon. We're all felons. Trump looks sharp. Todd Blanche looking good. Zooming into the courtroom. And just as we pointed earlier in this show, Trump was doing the same thing. I know who you are. We got your names there, buddy. So hopefully you enjoyed your corruption and your little scam, because we got your name. All right, so that is what CNN has for us. Trump was sentenced. We already went through all of that. No jail time, no penalties at all. Trump did not react as Merchan concluded the hearing. So that's it. Now, I think we'll be looking for Trump's notice of appeal. So he'll take this up to the next level court, and we'll see what his appellate briefs look like. The way that the appeals generally work are you file a basic notice of appeal. So it's a very short filing that just says, okay, verdict's done, conviction's now attached. We're notifying you of the appeal to meet all the deadlines. And then there'll be a more substantive appellate memorandum that comes down later. So let's say Trump goes to the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court in the state of New York. Now they reverse the name. So the highest court's actually called the Court of Appeals. So they go to the highest court in New York and they get snubbed there. From there, they go up to the Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court. Then they make the same arguments. Immune official acts evidence was brought in illegally, and Trump was immune from that evidence. So they couldn't use it against him. So the verdict needs to be reversed. So it goes all the way back up to the Supreme Court, and we do this whole thing over again. Then they come back down and dismiss the case. And I think that might be what they were intimating John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett by doing this today. Time will tell. As it stands, congratulations. Trump is a convicted felon. Doesn't matter at all, because he is still your president, and he's going to be the president for the next 4 years. And there will be serious investigations into this conspiracy of lawfare that has been concocted by the Democrats, not only in New York, but everywhere in Florida, DC, and Georgia. And we hope they enjoyed themselves today. Doesn't make a damn worth of difference. And Trump is going to be even more animated. And I got to say, it's like they still haven't learned a thing. All of their efforts to stop him elected him in many ways, and they're still doing it. And he's got 10 days until he is in the White House. So I think this is just the cherry on top. They are trying to rub it in everybody's face, but they've just done themselves more damage than they can even fathom. And Trump and our side is as animated as ever. So good stuff there on that one.